Welcome, Wheel of Time community, to the Wheel of Time Pod-Thru. I'm Teresa.
And I'm Tim.
And together, we're going to walk through Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great.
Great. So before we get started, we just want to remind you that this is a reread, so there will be spoilers. You have been warned.
Spoilers!
Also, pronunciation. We're going to do our best, but I guarantee we're going to get stuff wrong, so let's just move past that.
Promise. I am dyslexic. I read these on my own for years and years before actually talking to people about them, and yeah, so I will mess things up. I am trying. I promise.
We're both trying. All right, so what are we going to be doing in this episode, Tim?
Well, in this episode, we're going to be covering chapters 1 and 2, The Eye of the World. These chapters, they're going to introduce us to some main characters and the world that we're going to be inhabiting for the rest of the Wheel of Time.
Cool.
Chapter 1 is titled An Empty Road, and the icon is the wheel.
So The Eye of the World starts, as all the books start, with this quote about the wheel. The wheel of time turns and ages come to pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the third age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose in the mountains of mist. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings in the turning of the wheel of time, but it was a beginning.
It was a beginning.
Wind. Always wind.
So I'm not gonna like lie. I love the way that every one of these books opens up.
Yeah.
Yes, you will probably be able to quote this by the end of this whole pod through, but there's something that Robert Jordan is doing here from the very beginning of the very first book that should cue you into some things. He is toying with the idea of how myth becomes legend, legend becomes myth. In other words,
how people remember history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as we see events take place in Randland, we're going to see them slightly morph as they get further and further away from the actual place that it happened or the time it happened. And we're going to see that they're not necessarily changing into something different in every case, maybe, but they are changing slightly over time.
Yeah, well, it's similar to how these days, like with our social media and how we have a constant news stream, that people don't necessarily take the time to fact check everything. So, you'll have an event and you'll have the truth of that event, but it just takes one rogue headline or one photograph taken out of context, and suddenly the story is changed. And then you've got people sharing that changed story. So it keeps getting shared and slightly morphed so that after some time passes, the story that's circulating isn't actually the truth. It sometimes doesn't bear any similarity to the truth.
Right.
Sometimes it does. It depends. But that just sort of human nature, like the nature of society and communication, that we tend to think that we know the truth of whatever the situation is, when in reality we're hearing things second, third, 50th hand, and it may have changed quite a bit.
So keep that in mind as we go through the story, especially when you hear people talk about the Dark One or the Forsaken, or especially in the very early books. I mean, when you hear people talk about the supernatural and how they're so convinced as they're talking about it, they know exactly what's actually going on. Because maybe they do, maybe they don't.
Yeah.
And Robert Jordan is going to use that to come back to bite you if you accept everything you hear at face value. You are going to be tricked in this story.
Yeah, good point.
So we start with two men walking from their along an empty road from their farmhouse to the local village. And as we go through this, we see it's very clear that winter has held on a lot longer than it should have.
Before we get too far into this, I just want to point out that Bella is introduced on page 2. So obviously she is the main character, most important character. Bella is the creator.
Yes.
Fight me.
Google it. You'll see what we're talking about. No, don't Google it if you want to. Yeah, so we're introduced here to Rand, who is our main character for especially The Eye of the World. Most of it's through his point of view. And his father, Tam, as they're walking down the quarry road. Rand is feeling really uneasy, partly because, winter has gone on a little long. So that means less food in the mountains and the hills for bears and wolves and all that. So they're coming down and they're finding people to snack on. So it's not necessarily a safe place to be at night and even out alone.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's not nighttime. It's not safe to be out alone.
Right. So Rand looks at Tam, his father, and Tam is solid as a rock. That's our first introduction to Tam al'Thor.
Yeah, like there's this great line that basically says, wolves and bears were all very well, but they best not try to stop Tam al'Thor. And honestly, that is true for everyone. Bad guys, like animals, whatever. Tam's Bamf. Like, no one messes with Tam al'Thor.
Nope. So, as they're walking along, Rand sees a black rider whose cloak doesn't move in the wind.
Ring wraith.
Yeah, well, okay. So he feels this really intense hatred coming off this dark rider and has a visceral reaction to it. He actually stumbles because of it.
Yeah.
And then he tells Tam, like, hey, I saw this thing. And then when they both look to see where the rider was, they find nothing. So this is a good time to talk about
the elephant in the room.
A very large-ish, smallish elephant in the room. We all know that we all know that J.R.R. Tolkien is the grandfather of modern-day fantasy. Jordan does not shy away from any of those classical fantasy tropes that are very much things you find in The Lord of the Rings and other Tolkien books. But what he does, he uses that as a way to kind of make you feel familiar with the story. Like you recognize this from something else, so you kind of understand what's going on without him having to explain every single detail.
Right.
But then he turns it up on its head in many places, so it still feels unique to this story. It's not exactly the same thing as it is in The Lord of the Rings, but you're familiar with it.
Yeah, it's like he takes those common tropes as a starting place, but he doesn't leave us there. He moves past the tropiness of them and like turns it into something that's his own.
And if you got to also kind of like imagine like when this book came out in the early 90s, I mean, this came out before Game of Thrones. This came out.
Right.
This really was the next big epic fantasy that got really any momentum after The Lord of the Rings. So
yeah,
you're going to see that parallel there, but if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, sorry, yeah, we're not going to be a complete copy. This is going to get different, but it's going to be familiar, so it feels easy to get into.
Yeah. So they don't see any evidence of the rider, and we know at this point that that's a Myrddraal. So they agree to keep moving towards the village, and then Tam sees that Rand is uneasy, so he mentions Egwene, who's a local girl in the village, possibly trying to calm Rand down or distract Rand.
Right.
And she's a distraction, but she's certainly not calming. Rand thinks to himself, for the past year, she'd been making him increasingly jittery whenever they were together. Worse, she did not even seem to be aware of it. Aw, Rand. Aww. She is so totally aware of it.
Yeah, sorry about
Poor
that,
silly boy.
Oh, youth.
Right.
So, in an effort to kind of help Rand calm down, Tam mentions this idea of the flame and the void to calm himself.
Yeah.
This is a kind of centering or a meditation exercise that Tam taught Rand way back when he first learned how to use a bow, which the Two Rivers men are very well known for. This happened long before he ever channeled, but he will come to rely on this technique throughout the rest of the story.
Yeah, it becomes very, very important.
Yeah, there's a similar technique that they teach in the Tower of the Novices, but the flame and the void are something that soldiers use, but become very, very important for male channelers especially.
Yeah. So they finally make it to the village where they're getting ready for the Beltane Festival, which is their spring, May Day festival. And the villagers are waving to Tam and trying to stop him and talk to him because, he's well-liked and he's respected. So they discuss the harsh winter and, some of the bad things that have been happening. And then there's this great quote that it sums up the Two Rivers people perfectly. And it says, most of the men rolled their shoulders and said, well, we'll survive the light willing, and if the light doesn't will, we will still survive. And that was the way of most Two Rivers people. They're stubborn, hard-made people that when the going gets tough, they steamroll right along. You cannot keep the Two Rivers people down.
Well, you can try, but yeah.
But you'll fail.
So Tam and Rand make their way through the village, and we just see a lot of small-town bustle. Rand reflects on how the women are always trying to hook up Tam because he's a widower.
And it is a well-known fact that a single man in possession of a large farm must be in want of a wife.
I might have heard that somewhere.
Something similar.
Something, yeah. So, as they're going through town, Tam is confronted by the two main village gossips, the Congers and the Coplans. He doesn't put up with any of their random complaining stuff because he does not suffer fools lightly.
And we'll hear about the Congers and the Coplans again. Like, they're a running joke throughout the Two Rivers segments.
They are. And then we also get introduced to the concept of the women's circle and their role in the village. We hear them complain, these fools, start complaining about Nynaeve, the wisdom. And Tam very graciously extricates himself in situations that they just kind of drug on till they get to the inn, where we meet Bran Alver, who
Egwin's father,
and the owner of the inn, and the village mayor. So, yay! I like Bran. He's a good guy.
Yes.
Once we're there, we hear more old people complaining, specifically Senbui, who is the old crodger on the village council.
Old cantankerous man.
Yeah, that's a great trope. We can need more of that.
He's a thorn in everyone's side.
Yeah, everyone's.
So while the men are talking, Rand is greeted by his friend Matt, who's another one of our main characters. And I think that the way Robert Jordan introduces Matt is really interesting for two reasons. The first of which is his physical description. He's described as tall and lanky and wiry and flexible, which is very similar to how Tom Marilyn is described, and we'll meet him in a couple chapters. But I liked it because, we see that Matt has a knack for juggling and acrobatics that he learns from Tom. So I just thought it was really neat that they're described to have, a similar build and stuff like that. The second thing that's interesting is that Rand, in the beginning of the chapter, was introduced as a man. We see that two men are walking along the road, Rand and Tam, whereas Matt is definitely introduced as a boy. They're the same age, but here we see Matt planning to set a badger loose on the green and getting in trouble for the stuff he's been up to. So Robert Jordan is very subtly setting Rand apart from his friends.
So Matt tells Rand that there are strangers in their village of Edmonds Field, and also reveals to Rand that he has seen the writer as well. He felt the writer just like Rand did, and
that he's evil.
That he's evil, but no one believes Matt for some strange reason. Maybe because
it's Matt.
He's Matt, yeah.
But I want to point out here that Matt says to Rand that they ought to tell someone, but Rand reminds him that they both already have, but they weren't believed. So this is going to come back and bite them in the ass later because they don't tell things in the future that they really should have. Like they should have told Moraine various things, and they don't, and then it just causes more trouble for everybody.
So the chapter ends with the boys getting roped into unloading the wagon that they brought into town. And that's pretty much all that happens. Oh, they hear that a gleeman. That's our hook into the next chapter. They hear a gleeman is there, and that kind of takes some of their oh man, got to do all this work again. But at least they're gonna get to see a gleeman. And that's pretty much all that happens here in this chapter. So not a lot. It's a lot of world building, but some important stuff that's gonna pay off later.
And that brings us to chapter 2. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Yay!
This episode of the Wheel of Time Pod-Thru is brought to you by the Wine Spring Inn. Come see their red roof tile, the only roof like that in the village. They've got the best locally made ale and brandy, and no one can resist Mr. Salvier's freshly baked honey cakes. The Wine Spring Inn, here to meet all of your lodging needs as you travel to Emmons Field.
Okay, chapter 2. Chapter is titled Strangers, and the icon is the two ravens. Now, for those who understand that Matt is linked to ravens, here's some cool trivia. These are supposedly Odin's ravens, and when you translate their names into English, it's thought and memory. Just a random tidbit.
That's cool.
So chapter 2 opens with more of the same that we saw in chapter 1, some world building and some introduction to characters. Rand and Matt are unloading the cart still, while Matt talks more about the mischief he makes and
like flowering the dogs and random stuff.
Typical boy stuff. So we see that Mr. Stalvera is taking care of the boys while this is going on. She feeds them some honey cakes, make sure they got some stuff to drink. What we're seeing here as a reader, what's going on, is that we're being led into the fact that this is a safe place for Rand, especially Rand. Matt, too. She brings Matt in, even though he's a troublemaker.
Yeah.
But she creates a safe place for these children. She's taking care of them.
Yeah.
So while all that's going on, the village council is meeting, and Rand can tell from just the vibe that's going on that they don't want to be disturbed. Some important stuff is going down. While the council's meeting, he and Matt finish up unloading the cart, and they're met by their friend Ewan, who's younger than them. Yeah, Fingar. Ewan is younger than them, and he has brought word that there are strangers in town, and one of them's a high-born lady.
I really like Ewan, especially in this first section where he's so adorable with his high-born lady, and it's called In Service. They're so backwater in this village.
But they know so much, don't they?
They read.
Yeah, or maybe. So Ewan has overheard the names of the strangers. They're Moraine and Lan. And the boys muse about who they really are, if Lan is a soldier, maybe, and what the heck they want.
Right.
So Ewan says, the wisdom may not like her, but I do. And then tells Rand and Matt that after they ask him what's going on, because apparently Moraine referred to Nynaeve as a child.
Oh, Moraine. Okay, so Moraine accidentally trips into what could possibly be Nynaeve's most sensitive spot. We've already seen in the first chapter 2 separate people complaining about her youth, saying that something has to be done about her because she's too young. So she's super defensive about her age for very good reason. She's not, sensitive just because. There's good reason for it. And from Moraine's perspective, she had no idea that Nynaeve was the wisdom, because Nynaeve looks really young. She is older than, Rand and Matt and our main people, but she looks like she's the same age. She looks like she's about 18. And so even looking for a young wisdom, Moraine was not thinking that Nynaeve could possibly be the wisdom. And also, Moraine can sense that Nynaeve can channel. Nynaeve's a welder. So Moraine, knowing that Nynaeve could channel, would automatically be thinking about her in Aes Sedai terms.
Right.
And Aes Sedai called novices or, other young women child. That's just what they do. So Moraine wasn't meaning offense. And as soon as she realizes her mistake, she tries to fix it. She tries to placate Nynaeve by asking about herbs. And, Moraine doesn't care at all about herbs. She's just trying to make peace. But it's too late. Even though Moraine apologizes, Nynaeve is set at odds to Moraine right from the start. And that animosity travels throughout a good portion of the series.
Yeah.
And it starts here.
Yay, very beginning. Woohoo! The boys, they keep talking, so Ewan tells a story and they kind of react, but they keep talking as they're done, and they're heading outside now. They're done loading the cart. And the boys step outside and they feel kind of weird, and they're kind of something's watching them, and they notice that there's a raven watching them from across the way. So both Matt and Rand decide to pick up rocks at the exact same time to throw them at it and scare the bird away. I've grew up in the middle of nowhere. I've thrown plenty of rocks at ravens before, and they fly away when you do this.
Not this one.
Not this one. It just kind of like a cat looks at them like, oh, no, you didn't, and just kind of steps to the side and continues to stare at them, which is really weird. So we find out later on that rats and ravens specifically can be the actual spies for the Dark Ones. They call them the Dark One's eyes.
I think it's so funny how much this series has taken over our perception of things.
Oh.
Because when we're out in the world, I'll see a black bird. It doesn't matter what it is, and automatically I'm like, Dark One's eyes.
Yeah, sometimes we'll say it right together. Or you see it on a random like movie or a TV show or something, and like it's right there. It's like, oh, Dark One's eyes. Yeah, it
warped
is.
our brains.
It would totally. Well, maybe that didn't warp our brains. But whatever. So. That's the reason the boys feel weird when they walk outside, is that they're literally being watched by the forces of darkness.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So next, enter Moraine and Lan. Dun, dun, dun. So a real introduction to Moraine is here. And she is dressed to the nines. She's very impressive. She's got her great serpent ring on. She's in a dress that's slashed with the colors to indicate her noble rank from Kyrian. She's not hiding at all about what she is, which is kind of weird. Like, in the future, we'll see that Lan and Moraine go by aliases, and she doesn't wear her ring, and, because it's not necessarily safe in all places out in the world for an Aes Sedai. Some people are very prejudiced or judgmental or whatever against Aes Sedai. So she hides, but she's not hiding here at all.
So let's pause here to talk about that, because it sounds to me like you have a theory, Teresa.
I have two theories.
Okay.
So the first theory is probably not accurate, but I really super like this theory. So headcanon, I'm just going to go with it. But so the first theory is that Moraine knows that Tom is in Emmons Field. And we see later that she knows exactly who Tom is. And I can definitely see it as part of her character to want to impress and intimidate the hell out of him from the get-go. They're both masters at the game of houses. And I can definitely see her trying to set Tom off balance with this move and get him wondering, like, what is she up to? That's the theory that I love. Okay. But in all likelihood, like, the reality is her appearance here is simply literary shorthand. Jordan is doing a bunch of world building. He's giving the reader a ton of information. And it's helpful for us as the reader to see who Moraine is from the very beginning, because she's a really secretive character. She is not the kind of character who's going to sit down with someone and be like, here, let me tell you all about myself. This is my life. No, not at all. So he's telling us exactly who she is just by her appearance, just a shortcut. That's probably what's accurate, but I like my Tom theory.
I like the Tom theory too, because
I love Tom.
Yeah. So, the tour folk are instantly impressed and falling all over themselves to talk to Moraine and kind of like engage with her now that she's actually out and we have her on the screen, so to speak.
A rare Moraine sighting.
Ooh. So her response to them is like, I'm here to collect stories. And they're all like, right. What? And she says, so I may have some odd jobs for some of you. And she hands out coins in advance.
Right.
She gives a coin to Matt, she gives a coin to Ran, and she pauses for a second as she gives them each, and then she gives a coin to Ewan, but doesn't pause.
Yeah, like she presses the coins into the Matt and Rand's hands, but she just kind of gives the coin to Ewan.
Yes.
And she tells them to keep the coins.
Right.
That there's a bond between them.
Right, but it doesn't tell Ewan that. So this starts a really big debate about whether or not she's compelling Rand and Matt with this bond.
Right.
So the idea is that later on in the story,
at the end of the book,
at the end of this book, Moraine kind of tells Rand that one of the reasons she knew he can channel is that when she makes this bond, he should have done what she wanted him to do right away, but he resists it. It doesn't have the same hold on him as it does with Matt.
Right.
So that's how she was keyed into the fact that he, like right here from the very beginning, she was keyed into the fact that he gets a channeler.
And that's like the theory of why people think it might be compulsion.
Right. I don't think it's the same thing as compulsion. I think it's more similar to something like the warder bond.
Right.
Which does have an element of that, like the Aes Sedai can force the warder to they want.
Like there's
but
kind of a vague similarity to compulsion.
But this is a very passive, this is just a bond, there's a connection between them. That's my own personal opinion anyway.
Right.
So,
Well, I mean, we need to remember that this is only book 1. So all of the rules of magic and everything aren't 100% set in stone. Jordan may not have even invented compulsion yet at this point. So, when it comes to questionable scenes like this, especially in the first book, we just need to take it with a grain of salt and realize that, it's possible that things might be a little different when they, in later books.
But what do you guys think? I mean, we can sit here and talk about this on a podcast all day, but let us know what you think. Find us on Twitter at Pod-Thru, email us. Let us know what you think, and we can talk about this some more.
Yeah. So they leave, and Rand gets his first look at Lan and can only describe him as a wolf. He radiates danger. And to be honest, for like the first 2 books, at least, that's how everybody describes him. He barely gets a line, but everyone just talks about how dangerous he is.
Yeah.
And this is also the first mention of the warder's color-shifting cloak.
Yay!
I want one of those cloaks. Like, they sound so cool.
Yeah. I just really showed how uncool I am. But yeah, I really want one of those cloaks. Oh, wow. Anyway, the boys talk about their coins, and Matt uncharacteristically says that he's not going to spend it.
Yeah.
Wait, Matt's not going to spend money?
Something weird.
Even through the rest of the story, we know this is weird. Okay, so...
And Rand agrees. Like, Rand says, yeah,
Right.
totally. Shouldn't spend it.
So that's Miranda and Matt talking, but then Ewan says, well, maybe I shouldn't spend mine? And they're like, oh, no, you should totally spend yours, dude. Like, you're good. Because Ewan obviously has not got the same bond applied that Matt and Rand, because yes, I can talk.
Lies.
Well, I'll prove that later. So they speculate.
Yeah, like he hasn't been chosen out
Right.
the same way. Yeah.
So Ewan hasn't been chosen, and then Miranda and Matt are kind of sitting there speculating, okay, well, she says she's collecting stories, but who wants stories about sheep? That's all that's ever happened here anyway, right? Right?
Oh, sheep.
Oh, but we'll find out later that there's so much more. And this chapter ends with the arrival of the peddler. And that's it for here.
Yeah, and that ends chapters 1 and 2 of The Eye of the World. In next week's episode, we'll cover chapters 3 and 4, where we'll meet even more characters, hear news from outside of the 2 rivers, and listen as Tam Althor drops some knowledge.
Bum, bum.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Wheel of Time Pod-Thru.
We'll see you again next week. And make sure that you rate us and subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you grab your podcasts. Maybe even leave us a review.
That would really help us out,
cool.
yeah.
It helps us get up there on the top of the list. Also, leave us a comment at Pod-Thru.
Tweet at us.
Sorry. I can do this like social media thing. Yeah, so
it's what the youngins are doing.
The Twitters, and the Twitters, yeah. And or just old school Gmail.
Yeah, you can email us at wodpodthru@gmail.com. That's WOTPODTHRU@gmail.com. And let us know your thoughts on anything that we've covered today.
Please.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for listening. And we hope that the wheel weaves you in our direction again soon.